It began on a night drenched in gold and blood. Louisiana, the year was 1842. The air lay heavy with the perfume of magnolias, thick enough to choke, clinging to every breath like something alive. A hot wind moved through the cypress trees, carrying the sound of violins that floated from the grandest house on the river, a house with columns as pale as bone, standing against the swamp like a sentinel of pride. Tonight, that house belonged to Henry Duval. Tonight, it would become a tomb. The invitations had promised an evening of grace, wealth, and glory. The most powerful men of the state came, their wives glittering with diamonds that caught the candlelight like frozen tears. The clink of crystal, the soft murmur of conversation, and the laughter of those who believed the night belonged to them. All of it echoed under ceilings carved with angels who did not blink. They thought they were safe. They thought this was a celebration of life. But by dawn, every one of them would be dead. Look closer. Picture the table stretching like a serpent through the center of the room, dressed in white linen, heavy with silver platters gleaming under chandeliers dripping crystal. A feast for kings, pheasant glistening with honey glaze, fruits shining like jewels, wines as red as spilled veins. And yet, behind that perfection, something stirred. It was in the way the firelight bent wrong, in the way the shadows seemed too deep, too alive. The first sign came with silence. It fell after the last toast, sudden and unnatural, like the air itself forgot how to breathe. The violin strings stilled mid-note, trembling in the quiet. Then, a scream, sharp, raw, ripped from a man's throat and swallowed by the dark. Another followed, and another. Chairs scraped, glass shattered, hands clawed at doors that would not open, at windows nailed shut like coffins sealed for burial. By morning the fire will consume it all. The walls, the secrets, the sins. And yet some things refuse to burn. Some truths cling to the bone like a shadow that never dies. This is that truth. This is the night the world forgot, because forgetting was the only way to survive it. Now write in the comments which city and what time you are listening to us from, so we know who is absorbing this secret. Louisiana in 1842 was a kingdom built on illusions, wealth balanced on chains, beauty fed by blood. The plantations rose like palaces along the Mississippi, their white columns reaching toward heaven while their roots curled deep into hell. This was the South at its most opulent, dressed in silk and drowning in secrets. By day, it glittered with sunlight and sugar. By night, it hid whispers that clawed at the soul. And on the night of the hollow feast, the whisper became a scream. Picture the river that night, slow, black, endless, the air swollen with heat, pressing against the skin like a fever. Even the insects had gone silent, as if they sensed what was coming. Torches flickered along the driveway of the Duval estate, throwing trembling shadows across marble statues that looked too human in the dark, their faces frozen in expressions that almost seemed afraid. Inside, the ballroom glowed with hundreds of candles, each flame bending low as if kneeling before something unseen. The walls were lined with mirrors, and in those mirrors the guests danced, perfect, elegant, unaware that every reflection was already a ghost. The women's gowns swept the floor like waves of blood and ivory. The men moved stiffly, their faces stern masks of power and pride. None of them knew this would be the last night they would wear those faces. The Duval family was at the center, radiating charm like sunlight through stained glass. Henri Duval, the master of the house, smiled with teeth that never touched his eyes. His wife Celeste dripped pearls and secrets in equal measure, and their daughter, sweet, silent Elodie, floated through the crowd like a shadow in silk, eyes lowered, hands clasped tight as though in prayer. On the surface, it was a dream, a night of music, wine, and laughter. But beneath the polished floors, something moved. Beneath the hymns and toasts, something hummed, a pulse that did not belong to any living heart. And though no one spoke of it, though no one dared to look too long into the corners where the candlelight died, the house itself seemed to listen. It waited. And it was patient. And if you feel ready to take the next step and become part of this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Henri Duval was the kind of man who understood power, not as a word but as a taste, a texture, a hunger that never stopped feeding. Born of old money and older sins, he ruled his estate like a king, sharp in his black coat, his boots polished to a merciless shine. They said his voice could charm a serpent and command an army in the same breath. They said he believed in nothing but his bloodline, and in keeping that bloodline pure. Celeste Duval was beauty wrapped in porcelain and venom. Her hair shimmered like molten gold under candlelight, and her smile never faltered even when her eyes froze like winter water. She collected secrets the way others collected jewels, hidden in boxes, sewn into hems, pressed between the pages of holy books. Men adored her. Women feared her. But what she feared, no one could name. And then there was Elodie, their only daughter, a creature of quiet shadows. At 17, she looked like something carved by an angel and broken by a demon. She never laughed. She rarely spoke. She walked the halls of the house barefoot, her silk nightgowns whispering across the floors like smoke. The servants crossed themselves when she passed, for they said her eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, as if she were staring through this world and into another. The family seemed perfect to outsiders, but perfection is a mask. And masks always crack. The whispers began small, strange deliveries at night, priests leaving the house pale and trembling, sounds in the walls that were not rats and not wind. A seamstress once claimed she saw something in Elodie's room, a circle drawn in ash, candles burnt down to pools of blood-red wax. The next day she vanished. Henri silenced the rumors with gold. Celeste smiled them into smoke, but behind the shutters, the house groaned with secrets too heavy to hold. And on that night, the night of the hollow feast, they would invite the entire world inside, not to dine but to kneel, because this was never about food. It was never about celebration. It was about sacrifice. And the Duvals, they were not hosts, they were harvesters. It began weeks before the hollow feast. Whispers carried on the wind like the scent of rot. At first it was small things. A stable boy vanished, leaving behind only a horseshoe slick with something dark. A maid fell sick with fever, her skin breaking out in strange marks that looked like letters no one could read. She died 3 days later, tongue black, eyes wide open, staring at something no one else could see. Neighbors spoke of strange music drifting from the Duval estate at midnight, notes that bent and bled, like hymns sung backward by broken throats. Hunters swore the woods were different, the trees too still, as if they were listening. And sometimes, deep in the swamp, voices rose, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of moans as though the earth itself was mourning. The local priest, Father Moreau, paid the Duvals a visit. He left pale, sweating, clutching his rosary so tight the beads cut into his palm. When asked what he saw, he muttered only one word: circles. A week later, they found him hanging from the bell tower, his blood painting a symbol across the stones, a spiral curling inward like a serpent devoured. Nung itself. And then came the invitations, gilded cards sent to the finest families, sealed with wax and the Duval crest. Grand banquet to honor the blessings of the season, they wrote. Music, wine, luxury beyond imagination. Come dressed in black, every guest accepted, because who refuses Henri Duval? Who denies the man whose word can break fortunes like twigs? The night drew near. The cooks worked tirelessly, yet no one ever saw the food delivered. The wine cellars were locked. Servants whispered of meat with no name, of bones too small to belong to cattle. But when asked, they lowered their eyes, for in the Duval house, questions were punishable by silence. One servant tried to flee. They found him 2 days later in the swamp, throat slit, mouth stuffed with pages torn from a Bible. The sheriff called it madness. The newspapers called it misfortune. But the truth was already knocking at the door of the hollow feast, and when that door opened, death walked in, wearing silk gloves. The night was a masterpiece of deception. Candles burned in towering candelabras, their flames trembling like guilty souls. Velvet curtains shut out the swamp, trapping the scent of flowers and something rancid. The guests arrived one by one, their carriages vanishing into the fog like offerings swallowed by the dark. Inside, the dining hall glittered, crystal glasses catching firelight, a table heavy with silver platters gleaming like mirrors of another world. The air hummed with music, but the notes were wrong, too slow, too hollow, as if the instruments were not played by hands, but by something pulling strings from the shadows. Henri welcomed them with a smile carved from marble. Celeste kissed their cheeks like a queen greeting sacrifices at an altar. Elodie drifted among them, silent as a candle's last breath, her black silk gown dragging like a funeral shroud. She carried a single white lily, the only color in the room. The feast began with laughter, but laughter is fragile. It shattered with he first scream. A woman at the far end of the table convulsed, her fingers clawing at her throat as if trying to pull something out. Blood welled between her teeth, spilling down her silk like red lace. Then another guest fell, and another. Panic erupted, chairs crashing, glasses splintering. But when the guests ran to the doors, they did not open. Bolted, sealed, as if the house itself had locked its jaws. One man smashed a window with a candlestick, only to find boards nailed across from the outside. The smell of rot grew thicker, coating their tongues like oil. Then the candles flickered, and every flame died in unison. Darkness swallowed them whole. When the light returned, faint green, as if crawling from beneath the floorboards, they saw the truth. The table was no longer set with food. It was set with symbols carved into the wood, glowing like embers. At the center lay something wrapped in cloth, wet, crimson. The cloth slipped, revealing a skull, small, childlike, and above it all, on the wall behind Henri, a circle painted in blood, spiraling inward, swallowing every eye in the room. Henri raised his glass. His voice was calm, cold, eternal. "Eat," he said, "and be hollow." The room became a cage of screams. Chairs toppled, skirts tore, boots thundered against the floor as men and women hurled themselves at walls that would not yield. Some clawed at the boards with bleeding nails, others smashed porcelain and glass until their hands were ribbons of red. But no door opened, no window shattered. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it would not let them leave. Henri stood still at the head of the table, his smile frozen, his eyes burning with a fever older than sin. Celeste moved behind him, her fingers trailing the backs of the guests like a caress before the blade. Elodie stood silent, that white lily still in her grip, though now its petals were streaked with blood, as if drinking from the air. Then came the sound, low at first, a murmur beneath the floorboards, then rising like the breath of a buried choir, words twisted in a tongue no living throat should speak. The walls pulsed, the candles flared green, and one by one the guests stopped screaming, not because they found escape, but because something took their voices. Mouths opened in terror, but no sound came out, only blood, thick, black, running down their chins. They dropped to their knees as if in prayer, their eyes rolled white, and then, then came the final act. Their tongues, every single one, was carved, not by a blade, by something unseen, sliced clean and marked with a spiral, burned into the flesh as though kissed by fire from below, their bodies twisted, limbs bending where limbs should not bend. Some laughed, a wet gurgling sound before their throats collapsed inward like paper. Others began to eat, the table, the cloth, the bones that lay upon the platters, chewing until their teeth cracked and their mouths filled with splinters and gore. When it ended, silence ruled like a tyrant. Every guest lay dead, except Henri. He sat among the corpses, his glass untouched, staring at something only he could see. Celeste knelt beside him, her face serene, whispering words that crawled like worms. And Elodie? She laid the blood-stained lily upon the skull at the center of the table, then turned to the darkness and smiled. The hollow feast was complete, but the hunger had only begun. Morning did not break for the hollow house. Dawn came late, veiled behind a sky the color of ash, and the swamp lay heavy with fog, as if it knew what it had witnessed in the dark. The first to arrive was not the sheriff, not the priest, not even the neighbors. It was the stench, so thick, so vile, it spread like a living plague through the trees. Then came the flies, black clouds that rose from the shutters like smoke from a furnace. When the doors were finally forced open, men staggered back retching. They spoke of heat in zone. By day the house, a heat that steamed from the walls as if the wood had fever. The great dining hall lay in ruin, candles melted into pools of wax like flesh stripped from bone. The silver platters were empty. Not a crumb, not a drop of wine. Only the spiral carved into the table's heart, still glowing faintly, as if mocking the daylight. And then came the bodies. God, the bodies. Not arranged, not scattered, stacked, piled like offerings at the foot of the head chair, limbs entwined in grotesque embrace, jaws locked open, eyes bulging, black with rot though they had died only hours ago. Each tongue bore the spiral, each hand was clenched into a fist, nails driven deep enough to break skin as though they had tried to hold on to something. And lost. Henri's chair was empty. No trace of Celeste, no trace of Elodie. Only footprints, small and bare, leading from the blood-slick floor to the door of the cellar, a door that had never been seen before that night. The men opened it. They should not have. What they found below I will not tell you yet. Not now. The newspapers ran the story for 2 days before silence fell like a guillotine. Tragic banquet fire, they called it. Said the heat of the candles sparked an inferno, said the bodies burned beyond recognition. A lie so clean, the city swallowed it whole. The hollow house was boarded up, sealed by order of the court, and by the year's end even its name was gone from the lips of men. But the house still stands, it breathes, and in its cellar, something waits. The men lit their lanterns with trembling hands. The cellar door yawned open like the throat of a beast, exhaling air so cold it stung their lungs. Each step downward sounded wrong, too hollow, too loud, like knocking on a coffin lid. When their boots touched the earth below, they froze. The space was vast, far larger than the foundation should allow, walls of raw stee, one slick with black moisture. No barrels, no wine racks, no sign of storage, just carvings, spirals, hundreds of them etched deep into the rock, glowing, faintly as if inked with something alive. The pattern pulled at the eyes, dragged thought into a whirlpool. One man swore he heard voices whispering his name. Another dropped his lantern and ran, but he never reached the stairs. In the center of the chamber stood an altar of bone, not animal, not human, at least not entirely. Its shape defied reason, a lattice of ribs twisted into a spire crowned by a skull with too many teeth. At its base lay fresh offerings, the tongues of the dead, each one marked with that same spiral. But there was more. Beneath the tongues, under a shroud of rotting velvet, they found a book. No one wanted to touch it. The leather cover was slick and warm like living skin. Symbols crawled across it, shifting when looked at too long. One man, bold or foolish, opened it. And in that instant, the lanterns flared white, searing their eyes with after-images that burned for days. The pages were filled with names, thousands of them, written in blood that had not dried. And beside each name, a date, dates centuries apart. And at the bottom of the last page, under a line of ink still wet, a phrase in that same impossible tongue. They could not read it, but they understood it. It was not a book of the dead, it was a ledger of the taken. Then came the sound again, low, rising, crawling from the stones. The spirals began to pulse, bleeding light. The altar shook. Something moved in the shadows, something that had waited through decades of silence, through walls and locks and prayers. They fled. Not all returned. The sheriff sealed the cellar and swore the men to silence. But the book vanished before the boards were nailed. Someone took it. Someone kept the hunger alive. Henri de Lamarck was never found. Not in the house, not in the swamps, not in the graves of those he fed, but there were footprints, small, bare, feminine, that led away from the altar, climbing out of the cellar, across the ruined hall, and into the fog. Some claimed they belonged to Celeste. Others whispered of Elodie, her daughter, who had vanished before the feast began. The men who searched said the trail wound deeper into the cypress marsh, past the drowning trees and the moss that hung like dead men's hair. For 2 miles they followed it until the prints stopped, not because the ground grew hard, but because the feet no longer touched the earth. The footprints ended in mid-step, as if she had walked into the air and never fallen, and yet, days later, a ferryman swore he saw them, Henri and Celeste, not in rags, not hiding like fugitives, but clothed in white, gliding across the black water in a flatboat that made no sound. He said they did not speak, did not blink, only stared straight ahead with eyes like burnt glass. When he called out, Henri turned his head, not fully, but enough, and smiled. That smile broke the man. He would not describe it, only said it was a smile not meant for men. Others spoke of music drifting through the swamp at night, a single violin playing a waltz older than the city itself. No source, no lanterns, just sound curling through the mist like smoke from an unseen fire. Weeks passed. The story rotted, as stories do, drowned by gossip and prayer. But in the archives, buried under court seals, you can find a statement from the last man who saw them, a hunter. He said they were not alone. Behind them, in the fog, something followed, tall as the trees, draped in shadows that clung like wet skin. It moved without sound, and when the wind stirred, he swore the spirals were on its flesh. The hunter fled and told no one for years. When he did, his hair was white, his hands twisted with tremors. He said the thing looked at him, through the mist, through the trees, and he felt his name being scraped out of his bones. Henri and Celeste were never buried, because you cannot bury what has stepped beyond the earth. The book was not burned. Do not believe the official reports. Fire cannot consume what was written in that tongue. The sheriff claimed it was lost in the chaos, but I tell you this, men kill for paper only when that paper holds power. And this book, this ledger, was not a relic. It was an account. Every name in its pages belonged to someone who had dined at Henri's table, or at others like it. Yes, others. For the hollow feast was not the first, nor the last. That banquet was merely one thread in a web that stretches beyond time, across oceans, into the marble halls where men shape nations. I have seen the scans. The ink is crimson, still wet after centuries, as if it feeds on something unseen. Each name carries a mark, a spiral, like those carved into the cellar walls, a binding, a claim, and the dates. Oh, the dates. 1721, 1794, 1834, 1922. Every few decades, another gathering, another feast, and with each, the same pattern: wealth, power, men of influence who vanished from the public eye, or ascended into positions no mortal ambition could secure. One name in particular chills the blood. It appeared on the first page and on the last: Henri de la Marque. No death date, no end. The ink beside his name is brighter than the rest, as if it was written yesterday. And then there are the others. Names you know. Names carved into history. Presidents, bankers, industrial titans. The architects of wars and markets. Men whose portraits hang in institutions that decide the fate of nations. And yet, when you look closely, when you peel back the stories told by schoolbooks, you see the same faces at the edge of every century. Not the same names. The same faces. Impossible? Look again. Look at their eyes in those portraits. The glassy sheen. The faint curve of a smile too cold for canvas. Look at the signatures. Compare the strokes. They do not change. What the ledger records is not life. It is debt. A bargain sealed in marrow, paid in fear. Lists of flesh and faith. Those who sign do not die. They simply pay and pay and pay until the ledger calls them home. And now you have heard its name. That alone is a weight you cannot put down. History is a language, but most men only learn the alphabet. They see events, wars, revolutions, empires rise and fall, and think these are accidents of greed and chance. They are not. They are feasts. Every turning point, every fracture in the spine of civilization is marked by a banquet, sometimes literal, sometimes veiled in ceremony, but always a gathering, always the same symbols, spirals etched in stone, mirrored in rings and insignias, always the same oath spoken not in words but in the hollow of the mind. Look back. 1794, Paris, drowned in blood, a republic devoured by its own architects. Days before the blade kissed the neck of kings, a dinner was held, exclusive, invitation only. Men who vanished from the city that night returned months later with coffers full and eyes like storm glass. 1914, a century later. Europe ablaze, but days before the first shot, there was a hunting lodge in the Black Forest. 12 men seated under antlers older than Rome, drinking from cups carved with spirals. None of them bled in the trenches. None of them starved in the famine. They returned richer than nations. And in 1929, when towers of greed crumbled and millions broke under hunger, the same pattern whispered through Wall Street. Men vanished from boardrooms for a single night. A private yacht, no crew but the nameless. When markets fell, their wealth grew fatter than ever. You think this is coincidence? Then answer me this. Why do the same families rise after every collapse? Why do the same names return, generation after generation, like ghosts wearing masks of flesh? The pattern does not lie. Every era is a harvest. Every banquet a knife in the belly of the world. When famine spreads, when nations fall, when men scream in the mud, it is not chaos, it is orchestration, a rhythm of ruin conducted by hands that never die. And here, Louisiana, 1834, Henri's feast was one movement in that symphony. A single note, echoing through centuries. Because what they ate that night was not flesh alone. It was a covenant, a hunger that binds. Look at history again, and tell me, does it look like progress, or does it look like a table laid with nations carved with spirals waiting for the next course? You think men orchestrate this alone? You think greed explains it all? Then you have not listened closely enough. There were more chairs at Henri's table than names in the ledger. The servants whispered of shadows that moved though no flame flickered. They spoke of seats that sank as if burdened by weight, though no body was seen. What eats at these feasts is older than language, older than the bones of the earth. You have read myths, yes? Titans, demons, gods with mouths that swallowed suns. You dismissed them as stories. That was your first mistake. Myths do not lie, they mask. They dress the truth in rags so men may sleep. In the journals of Father Delacroix, yes, the same priest who blessed the banquet hall before the hollow feast, you find scratches of terror. He writes of voices that came from no throat, murmurs that spoke his name in dreams, promising kingdoms for silence. On the night of the banquet, he wrote one last line before vanishing forever. The seats are not empty, the hollow eats. And the spiral? It is not art. It is an invitation, a mouth drawn in stone. The curve is a summons, a whirlpool pulling thought, faith, and blood into its core. When men carve it, they are not creating, they are answering. What sat in those chairs has no name that your tongue can shape, but it hungers, and it trades. Every empire that rose on broken backs, every war that fed on the marrow of millions, these were not mere human crimes, they were offerings, blood for bread, souls for crow. And here is what will chill you. Those presences, they do not speak in thunder, they whisper, they guide dreams, they slip into treaties and stock markets, into parliaments and pulpits. You think you choose, you think you vote, you pray, you buy. But every choice is a thread in a tapestry woven by hands you cannot see. What Henri did was not innovation, it was imitation. He mimicked the oldest ritual in the world. A supper for shadows, a feast for the hollow. And in return, the hollow opened its hand and dropped into his palm a seed of power that never dies. Now, tell me, when you close your eyes tonight, will you feel alone at your table? Or will you feel the empty chair beside you breathe? Power is never free. It never was. It never will be. The moment Henry signed his name in that crimson ledger, his soul was no longer his own. Do you think he cared? No man who touches the spiral ever does. They all believe they can take the gift and escape the debt. They all believe the hollow does not collect. But debt does not vanish. It waits, and when it comes in silence, never in thunder, never in fire. A bargain with the hollow is not like a contract with man. There is no date, no clause. There is only a shadow that grows behind you, a weight you cannot shake. Henri learned this the night after the feast. He thought it was over. He thought the banquet was a single ritual, a key that opened every door, and in truth, for a time it did. His influence stretched beyond Louisiana, beyond America. His ships carried goods men had never seen, and yet he never set foot on a dock. His name opened vaults in cities he never visited. But wealth was not the prize. No, the true gift was power over men's minds. They called him charming, they called him visionary, but what they did not know, what they could never know, was that every word Henri spoke carried weight beyond sound. He could turn rivals into allies with a whisper. He could turn loyalty into obsession with a glance. That is what the hollow sells, dominion over will. But then the shadows came closer. First in dreams, faces stretched too wide, eyes like black suns, then in whispers when the house was empty. You ate with us, now you feed us. Henri understood too late. The hollow feast never ends. You take one bite, and you become the banquet. His wife was first, then his sons, then the servants. He never killed them, not with his hands, but he opened doors. He set tables, and he watched as chairs filled with shapes that bent the candlelight. And when it was done, the spiral carved into the table seemed deeper, like a throat swallowing more than wood. Tell me, what would you give to own a world? And if the hollow asked for blood, not just theirs but yours, would you still take the seat? Do you believe the truth survives on its own? No. Truth is weak. It bleeds easily, and men sharpen knives for it every day. The hollow feast should have shattered Louisiana. It should have burned its name into the marrow of history. But when the doors of Henri's estate were opened, when lawmen stepped into that house of silence, they did not speak of what they saw. They could not. The first sheriff to enter the banquet hall, Joseph Marrow, was never the same. He walked in with a lantern, and before him lay a table long as Judgment Day, plates clean as bone, chairs warm though the storm outside howled cold. But no bodies. Not one. Henri, his family, his guests, all gone. The only thing left was the spiral, carved so deep the wood split like veins. Marrow wrote one sentence in his report. No evidence found. Property abandoned. Then he left his badge on his desk and shot himself in the heart before dawn. You think that stopped them? No. The church came next. Priests from New Orleans, men who spoke Latin like it was a weapon, walked through that hall with incense and holy water. They sealed the doors and swore silence before God. Why? Because they knew. They had seen the pattern before, in Rome, in Carthage, in temples buried under desert sand. This was not the first feast. It would not be the last. And then the men in black suits came. Not priests, not sheriffs, men whose names were never printed in ink. They took Henri's journals. They burned the letters of every guest. They paid off the newspapers and drowned the whispers in bourbon and money. Within a month, no one spoke the name Henri Delacroix. Within a year, he was erased. But erasure is never clean. Look closely in the archives. There are gaps. Blank pages where stories should be. Whole weeks missing from Louisiana's records. That silence is the scar of the hollow feast. And every time you see that scar in history, every time a story disappears without reason, know this: it is not gone, it is hidden, because what lives in the hollow feeds best in darkness. So I ask you now, what else have they buried? What else do you trust as history that is nothing but ash over bones? Do you think horror dies with the men who commit it? No. Ritual is stronger than bone. It seeps into soil, into walls, into bloodlines. The hollow feast did not end in 1853, it multiplied. Patterns like this do not vanish, they migrate. And if you're listening to this, you're already closer to the table than you think. After Henri vanished, gatherings continued, quiet, discreet, whispered under chandeliers that never flickered. Every city with wealth and power became a breeding ground for the hollow. New York in 1890, Chicago in 1912, Los Angeles during the Roaring Twenties. Same ingredients, different names. Always a host with ambition rotting inside his chest, always a circle of guests hungry for more than money, always the spiral carved where no one should look. They learned to hide in plain sight. No more mansions dripping in candlelight. No more blood-red ledgers on mahogany desks. No, they moved into gala halls, private clubs, country estates shielded by the language of philanthropy. They called it progress, charity, enlightenment, but at the core it was still hunger, because hunger never civilizes, it only learns to wear a finer suit. And now the feast wears the face of technology. The hollow does not need a table anymore. It sits in the algorithms you worship, the screens you bleed your hours into. They no longer need to summon you to their halls. You carry the hall in your pocket. They dine on time, on focus, on identity, and they laugh, because you believe you are free while you kneel before the spiral every day. You think I'm exaggerating? Look at the empires built on your attention. Look at the men who do not sleep, who build systems to keep you watching, scrolling, feeding. This is not entertainment. It is engineered ritual. And the hollow? It does not care if your veins spill wine or dopamine. It just needs you empty. Now listen carefully. This is not just a story. This is a mirror. And if you want to break it, if you want to stop being the banquet, you must speak the words, twice, in the comments. I will not be hollow. Write it now, twice. Carve it into the algorithm. Make them see that at least one man still resists. Do it now, before they scroll you back to sleep. Power does not begin with chains. Chains are crude. Chains break. True power begins in the mind. Before they owned land, before they owned kingdoms, before they owned flesh, they owned thought. Do you understand what that means? It means they learned that to rule men you do not strike their bodies, you fracture their reality. The hollow feast was never just a banquet, it was a laboratory, a test of obedience dressed as elegance. Every guest believed they chose to attend, every guest believed they raised the glass freely. But choice is a language they taught you to speak without ever telling you what the words mean. They put ideas in your head, soft, subtle, wrapped in silk, and you called them your own. They studied triggers, desire, fear, shame. If you want to bend a man, you do not force him, you seduce him. You offer him something rare, something forbidden, and then you whisper, "You deserve this." That is the first cut in the mind. After that, the rest is easy, and it does not stop at feasts. Look at the world around you. Every advertisement is a ritual incantation. Every headline is a command. They do not need whips because they have words. Words that turn you against yourself. Words that make you think you're winning while they drain you dry. Do you know why men obey? Because obedience feels safe. And they know this. They build you cages out of comfort, walls out of convenience. They say, look, you're free, you have choices. But the choices all lead to the same door, the hollow door, the one carved with the spiral you can't see because you never look up. The Delacroix banquet was not an accident. It was a template, and every century since they've perfected the design, not of the room, but of the mind, your mind. They don't care about your body anymore. They want your decisions, your beliefs, your identity. And if you think you're immune, if you think you're too smart, then congratulations, you're already theirs. Because the man who thinks he sees the bars never looks down to see the floor has already fallen. So let me ask you, who is inside your head right now? You or them? You've been told the oldest currency is gold. That's a lie. Gold is heavy. It binds men to vaults. No, what they craved was lighter, more fluid, more potent. The first true currency was trust. Break it and you own the man. But trust wears thin, so they invented something sharper. Blood. Not the blood of war. That's too loud. I'm talking about blood in silence, blood willingly offered by those who believed the feast made them immortal. Henri Delacroix understood. This. He didn't need armies. He needed loyalty carved so deep it bled on command. Every guest who entered his hall signed no paper. Their contract was cut in their own flesh, sealed by what they swore never to speak. And the ledger. Oh, the ledger was real. I've seen sketches in archives so deep the ink itself looked afraid to live. No numbers, no currency symbols, just names. Names in columns. And beside them, a date and a symbol. The spiral. Always the spiral. Do you know what that meant? That the person listed wasn't just invited. They were consumed. Because here's the truth. When you give blood, you give more than life. You give identity. You give consent. And that, my friend, is a currency no empire can counterfeit. That's why the Hollow Feast could outlive its host. It fed on agreements no law could trace. And they never stopped. They just changed the cut. It isn't knives now. It's signatures. Contracts you never read. Terms you accept without thinking. Every time you click, every time you tap, you bleed, not red, but data. And data, in the age of the algorithm, is thicker than blood. They don't just know your name now. They know your pulse, your hunger, your fear. They know when you're weak before you do. The Delacroix ledger was the first database. And every corporation you trust today is just a mansion with more windows. You think you've left the feast behind, but the table only grew longer. And now, your chair is waiting. So tell me, when you gave your fingerprint to unlock that phone, when you stared into that lens for security, did you think you were safe? Or did you just carve your name into the new ledger? You think the Hollow Feast was an isolated sin? No, it was the overture, the first note in a symphony of darkness that still plays in whispers today. Patterns. That's how they survive. They hide in repetition, in the echoes of events you thought were random. Look close, and the same shape returns. The spiral, always the spiral. Start with 1834, the Delacroix Banquet. Do you know what happened that same year in Europe? A famine in one regice, on opulence in another. Entire towns starved while a few dined like gods. Coincidence? Or calibration? A test to measure obedience, and every time the spiral appears, history bends. Fast forward, 1914, the Great War erupts. They told you it began with an assassination, but deeper beneath the blood and steel was a deal, a ritualized exchange that chained nations into chaos. Certain families prospered. Not families you vote for, families whose names never make it to your textbooks. The same bloodlines tied to the feast. Their fingerprints aren't in ink. They're in treaties, in banks, in foundations so ancient they make governments look like passing storms. Then 1963. A man's head shatters on live television. The world calls it politics. But the date, the timing, the symbols etched into the geometry of that event, all spiral, all pattern. The cameras weren't there by accident. The feast demands witnesses. It always has. And today, you think you're free because you hold glass and light in your hand. You scroll, you swipe, you feed. But who do you feed? Who do you really think drinks when you pour your attention into that endless mouth of screens? Every viral trend, every orchestrated outrage, every sudden crisis that pushes you from fear to obedience. It's the same design. New costumes, same spiral. They don't call it ritual anymore. They call it policy, market behavior, predictive analytics. But what does the spiral care about the name? It only cares that you follow the curve, and you have, every time, because men are predictable when fear and hunger speak louder than reason. Look back. Do you see it yet? The famine and the feast, the war and the wealth, the death and the dance. You thought history was progress. No, history is a wheel, and the spiral is its axle. The Hollow Feast never ended. It only learned to move faster. And now it moves through you. You believe power looks like the man on the podium, the voice behind the microphone, the smiling figure on magazine covers. You think the king sits on the throne, that the billionaire flaunts his wealth on yachts. That's what they want you to believe. Because real power never dances in the light. It moves in shadow, wearing masks so perfect, you never notice they exist. Henri Delacroix understood this centuries ago. At his table, titles meant nothing. Rank was theatre. Guests laughed, clinking glasses, never realizing who orchestrated their laughter, who counted the minutes until the poison began its silent work. Because that's the first rule of domination: control perception and you control reality. Now ask yourself, who controls yours? Politicians? Entertainers? CEOs? No. They are actors. Performers playing roles scripted by men you've never met. Men who understood long ago that influence is safer than ownership. Ownership leaves fingerprints. Influence leaves whispers. Think of history's loudest figures, the conquerors, the presidents, the tycoons. They burn bright, then vanish. But the architects, they survive. Because they hide behind structures so old they feel like nature itself. Laws, traditions, institutions. The face of power changes every decade. The hand behind it hasn't changed for centuries. You think the spiral ended with Delacroix? It grew teeth. It learned masks. Today, it doesn't wear blood-stained gloves. It wears corporate logos. It wears charities. It wears the smile of progress while the feast continues behind glass walls you'll never see through. And when the world burns, when markets collapse, when wars ignite, when nations kneel, those masks never slip. They shift, yes, from crown to corporation, from pulpit to parliament. But the eyes behind them? The eyes never change. Eyes that watched Henri raise his glass in 1834. Eyes that watched cities starve in 1914. Eyes that watch you now through the screen you think you own. Here's the question you've avoided. Why do they hide? Because truth is lethal. If you saw them, not their masks, but their true faces, the spiral would snap. The feast would end, and they would starve. That's why they bury history. That's why they erased the hollow feast from your textbooks. But you're here, listening, pulling at the thread. Do you feel it yet, the weight of the mask? Or are you still smiling with them? You think poison is a liquid in a goblet, bitter on the tongue, burning down the throat. No, the most dangerous poison is invisible. It's not something you drink, it's something you believe, and you've swallowed more than you'll ever admit. Consent, that's the trick. They never force you to the table, they make you want to sit. That was Delacroix's genius. He didn't drag his guests into that hall. They came willingly, dressed in their finest, smiling for an invitation they thought was honor. They raised their glasses because they believed they belonged. They toasted their own execution. Fast forward to now. You think you're not like them? Look at your life. Look at every choice you think you made. Your education, who decided what you should learn? Your news, who decides what you should know? Your anger, your fear, your hope, who placed them in your hands like loaded weapons, then told you which direction to aim? That's the poison. It's not in what you drink. It's in the illusion that you chose the glass. They engineer the feast so perfectly that you laugh while they carve the meat from your bones. They sell you safety, and you thank them for chains. They call it freedom, and you cheer as the bars close around you. You think algorithms are harmless? That's the chalice. Every click, every scroll, every flash of outrage, they feed you the dose, drop by drop, until your mind bends in ways you can't feel. And when the spiral turns again, you'll march where they want you to march, believe what they want you to believe, die for what they want you to protect, and you'll never know why. The hollow feast never needed tables anymore. The table is your screen. The wine is the information dripping into your eyes. The toast is every time you press agree, every time you whisper, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. You've already taken the sip. That moment you stopped asking why. That instant you traded truth for comfort. That's when the venom touched your tongue. And now? Now you think you can spit it out? No. It's in you, running through every thought, every fear, every dream you didn't choose. Welcome to the banquet. When history burns, it doesn't burn by chance. Fires don't crawl into libraries on their own. Flames don't choose which books to eat. Someone chooses. Someone decides which truths must vanish and which lies must live forever. Think of Alexandria, 48 BC. Scrolls reduced to smoke, knowledge erased in a single blaze. Accident? No. Think of the Reichstag fire. Think of Baghdad's libraries drowned in blood and ash. Every time humanity approached a doorway, someone set it on fire. Every time a culture remembered who they were, someone reached for the match. The hollow feast. Did you really think it vanished because no one cared? No. It was buried. Delacroix's banquet was documented in whispers, sealed in letters, hidden in church vaults. Then came the men with fire. Not torches now, but pens and stamps, red tape and words like classified, flames that erase without smoke. Ash you'll never see because they scatter it through your education, rewriting the script line by line. But here's what they never understood. Fire destroys the page, not the memory. Truth is like bone. It survives the flames. Fragments surface, in the margins of old ledgers, in symbols carved into stone by hands that knew someone would come looking, and someone always comes. That's why you're here, listening. Not by accident. This is the echo of what they tried to kill, the archive no fire could fully consume. They think they outdoye one time, that if they rewrite enough pages, they erase the crime. But time is a graveyard, and graves don't forget. They wait, patient, silent, until someone digs. Ask yourself, what burns today? What headlines distract while something older, heavier is reduced to dust? Because the fires never stopped. They just learned to smile. They call it progress. They call it deletion of harmful misinformation. They say, it's for your safety. And you believe them because the poison works best when it tastes like care. But if you've made it this far, something inside you resists. That spark they couldn't drown, that doubt they couldn't bury, that whisper saying, look closer, because every lie leaves a shadow, every fire leaves a smell, and once you smell it, you can never unsmell it. History is not gone, it is hidden, and tonight we open the vault. You think power disappears when men die? No, power doesn't die. It migrates, it sheds its skin and slides into new flesh, but the blood remains the same. The faces change, the titles change, but the lineage is eternal. When Delacroix raised his glass in Louisiana, do you think he was improvising? That he dreamed this feast out of vanity? No, he was a link. A thread in a tapestry woven long before his birth. Behind him, a council older than your nation. Men who don't live in centuries. They live in dynasties. Follow the smoke from the banquet hall. It doesn't vanish. It curls into the marble halls of Europe, across the Atlantic into secret salons of New York. The same family crests etched into rings worn by hands that shook kings into debt and presidents into obedience. You know the names whispered at the edges: Rothschild, Astor, DuPont. But those are the masks for the stage. The real architects don't sign checks. They sign destinies. The hollow feast wasn't a ritual for pleasure. It was a signal, a seal, a way to remind every initiate of the one law that has never changed. Control comes through sacrifice. You give the blood, you take the power, and those who feast once never go back. Even now, the pattern repeats. Different halls, different toasts. They call them summits now, conferences, forums. Men smiling for cameras while their shadows draw maps you'll never see. You think it's politics? You think it's business? No. It's geometry. It's architecture of control carved in the same ratios used to raise temples and tombs. And the blueprint always leads to one shape, the pyramid, one at the top, the rest feeding from below. And what about the families? They didn't vanish with powdered wigs and candlelight. They adapted, intermarried, bought bloodlines like assets, erased their names from the ledgers and carved new ones into corporate towers. Look deeper. Who owns the companies that own the companies? Who funds both sides of every war? Who controls the ink that writes the history books you worship? That banquet in 1834 was not the first, and it was never the last. It was simply a note in a symphony that still plays today, quiet enough that you mistake it for silence until you learn how to listen. And tonight, I will teach you to listen. Gold rusts, paper burns, digital codes vanish with the flick of a switch, but flesh has always been the one currency that never loses value. That is the secret Delacroix understood when he filled those silver platters in Louisiana. And that is the secret still pulsing beneath the skin of this world today. When they spoke of sacrifice in the old temples, did you think it was just religion? No, it was economics. Blood was the price for favor, for rain, for victory in war. The Aztecs carved it into stone. The Phoenicians sailed it across oceans. Every empire bled its own. Every throne stood on a foundation of bones. Now you tell yourself that we are civilized, that we've outgrown that hunger. Look closer. When a war erupts and suns march into gunfire, who profits? When a market crashes and thousands lose their homes, who collects? When a virus sweeps the world and fear turns into compliance, who grows richer than kings? Every death is a transaction. Every body, an offering. The banquet never ended. It only changed rooms. In 1834, those men in Louisiana weren't eating flesh because they were mad. They were declaring something. They were saying, "We do not play by your laws. We write them." They were saying, "Our appetite shapes the world." And you know what? They were right. Because while ordinary men bled in cane fields and cotton rows, those at the top carved out kingdoms with knives and forks. And today the knives are sharper, the feasts more subtle. They don't drain blood with chalices anymore. They drain it with debt, with wars that never end, with food that poisons slowly and screens that rot the mind. They feast on time, on labor, on your breath while you sleep. But listen carefully. The blood price hasn't disappeared. It has simply gone underground. The old families still collect it in ways you wouldn't dare imagine. Human trafficking, organ markets, rituals dressed as philanthropy. You think they're saving children? They're harvesting them. You think they're curing disease. They're cultivating it. Because nothing has more power than life, and nothing buys more control than death. The question is, when the next feast begins, will you even know you're on the menu? You think they act in the open? No, they hide in plain sight. The architects never announce their feasts with words. They announce them with symbols, patterns that your eyes see but your mind dismisses. The signal always comes before the storm. Look back. Before the hollow feast in 1834, there were whispers, paintings sold at auctions depicting tables drenched in crimson, invitations engraved with serpents devouring their tails. Ordinary men saw beauty. The initiated saw the call. That is the first rule. They never speak. They show. Now fast forward to today. Before every great event that reshapes the world, the signs appear. A logo change that mirrors an ancient sigil, a stage design that forms a geometry older than language, a sudden obsession with the color red in every advertisement before a war. You think it's art? No, it's alignment, it's permission, it's the drumbeat before the slaughter. Do you know why they do this? Because power is not only taken, it must be declared. Ritual demands witness, not by the masses, but by those who understand. And the more they show you without you seeing, the deeper their dominance grows. Because that is their pleasure, making you applaud your own chains. Remember the night before the Louisiana banquet? Reports spoke of lanterns glowing in a pattern down the Mississippi banks, 7 lights, spaced in perfect intervals. No one questioned it. They thought it was decoration. It wasn't. It was a seal marking the territory for what was about to happen. And that seal still appears. Different forms, same ratios. Watch for the 7, always 7. And the music, oh, the music. Before every major bloodletting in history, a specific melody resurfaces, sometimes in operas, sometimes in pop songs you hum without thinking, a tune older than Christ, carried through choirs and algorithms alike. When you hear it, understand this. The door has opened and the feast is being prepared. Now tell me, when was the last time you saw the 7? When was the last time you heard that melody in the background of your life? If you think you haven't, you're blind. It's there. It's always there. And soon, you'll see it everywhere. The next banquet will not need silver platters or candlelit halls. It will not echo with the clinking of glasses or the scraping of knives. No, this time, the table is everywhere, and the meat is your mind. Understand this. They learned long ago that flesh spoils, bodies decay, but consciousness, that is eternal if you know how to chain it. The greatest feast is not of blood. It is of thought, of will, of identity. They do not want to kill you. They want to rewrite you. The hollow feast was practice, a signal to the old families that control could evolve from physical to psychological. And they succeeded. Slowly, over centuries, they traded shackles of iron for chains of suggestion. They no longer take your body by force. They make you surrender it with gratitude. You think you own your choices? Look at the screen in your hand. Look at the ads you scroll. Every color, every sound, every phrase is engineered to cut into your neural pathways like a blade. They carve and carve and carve until your hunger isn't yours anymore, until your fear wears their mask. That is the new feast, a banquet of submission. They serve terror as an appetizer, chaos as the main course, and obedience for dessert. And you eat it, every single day. The question is not if the feast is coming, it is already here. The question is whether you will remain a dish or become a guest, because the families, the bloodlines, the architects, they are opening the circle wider now. They need more hands to keep the machinery running. They need men who see what others refuse to see, men who are not afraid to step into the dark and dine with wolves rather than be devoured by them. But beware, once you take that seat, you can never leave. Once you swallow the truth, there is no water in this world that will wash it down. The hollow feast was only a whisper. The next one will be a roar, and it will not be hidden. It will blaze across every screen, pulse through every wire, burn into every algorithm, until the entire Earth is a table and the entire species is a meal. The only question left is this: when the plates are set, will you still be human? You've heard their names whispered in fragments. You've seen their sigils etched in glass, towers and golden halls. But you have never truly looked at them. Not because they hide well, but because they make you blind. They are the architects of appetite, the ones who built this endless table. And their hunger is older than history. You think they are men, flesh and bone like you? No. Men are pawns, useful, disposable, forgettable. The architects are something else, something that does not age, does not die, does not sleep. Their bodies are vessels, changed like masks at a masquerade. Kings once, bankers now. Pharaohs once, CEOs now. The faces shift, the hunger does not. What do they hunger for? Not gold. Gold was only bait for the greedy, not land. Land is for animals who crawl. They hunger for something deeper, control over the pulse of creation itself. The force that makes men rise and kneel, dream and despair. Desire. If they can own your desire, they own you. This is why they feast. Not on meat, not on blood, but on the surrender of will. Every fear you nurse, every craving you feed, they taste it. They harvest it. They amplify it. And the more you obey, the stronger they grow. Because obedience is not weakness, it is a delicacy. Do you know their first law? It is carved into stone beneath the ruins of Ur, whispered in the catacombs beneath Rome, engraved in code inside the networks you scroll every day. Those who cannot refuse deserve to be consumed. That is the creed of the architects, and they live by it. Every addiction, every algorithm, every screen glowing in the dark is their altar. You think you are choosing, you think you are free, but you are kneeling. And you are offering yourself one click at a time. But here is the truth they do not want you to hear. Every feast has an end, even theirs, because no hunger can go unchallenged forever, and the day that someone turns their own table, the architects will choke on their own appetite. The question is, who will that someone be? The invitation is never delivered on paper, no wax seal, no messenger at midnight. It arrives in silence, woven into choices you never questioned, whispered in desires you thought were your own. That's how it begins. That's how they choose you. The hollow feast was not an event. It was a template, a pattern repeated through centuries, evolving with every age, and now it has taken its purest form, digital, invisible, inescapable. Do you feel it? The pull, the little voice that says, scroll once more, click one more time, watch for 5 more minutes. That voice is not you. It is the door creaking open. They are not hunting the weak anymore. No, they already own them. They are hunting the restless. The ones who sense the cage and push against its bars. Men like you. Men who wonder if there is more, who feel that chill in the blood when truth gets too close. That hunger you feel right now, that is why they've set a place for you. You think you came here by chance? You didn't. This is the first knock, the last invitation. Once you hear the whole story, you cannot leave unchanged. You cannot return to the blindness they want for you, and they know that. They count on it, because every rebel they break, every lion they tame, is a feast beyond price. Here's how the ritual works now. They don't lock you in basements. They lock you in loops. Endless cycles of pleasure and pain, dopamine and despair, scroll, laugh, rage, crave, buy, repeat, and all the while they drain you, not of blood but of essence. The moment you realize you are not free, that's when the feast begins. Because now you fight, and in fighting you bleed. They taste resistance like wine. They savor your struggle. That's why the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. But you're listening, which means you've already crossed the threshold. The invitation is in your hands now. The seat is waiting. And when you take it, you will understand the law. Once the table claims you, you can never leave. Unless you learn to flip the table. But to do that, you must hear the last secret. Everything, the hollow feast, the chains of desire, the cages of power, rests on one law. One principle so simple, so ancient that it hides in plain sight. It is older than kings, older than pyramids, older than fire itself. And yet, every empire, every throne, every screen you stare at, obeys it. Do you want to know it? Do you really? Because the moment I speak it, the game changes. You will never look at a crown, a dollar, a flag, or a glowing screen the same way again. You'll see the strings, and when you see them, you will feel them, tight around your own throat. The law is this. Power belongs to the one who defines reality. Not the strongest, not the richest, not the bravest. The one who controls the story, the frame through which others see the world. That is the hidden law. Every tyrant knew it. Every priest, every emperor, every media baron still knows it. Because if I can make you believe a lie, I don't need to chain your hands. You will chain yourself. This is the feast. It is not about flesh. It is about perception. Your beliefs are their banquet. Every idea you swallow without question feeds them. Every argument you fight over in their system nourishes them. You think you choose sides. You don't. They wrote both scripts. Look around you. Every word you read, every image you see, every story trending. Do you think that's random, or do you see it now? The pattern, the invisible architects framing reality so you live in their dream, and the longer you dream, the deeper you sink. Here's the cruel part. The law works both ways. If you learn to frame reality, you break their spell. You stop being food. You become something else, something dangerous. But this path has a cost. You will be hated, feared, hunted, because nothing terrifies the architects more than a man who can define his own world. So here's the question. Will you keep feeding them, or will you take the law into your hands? Because the moment you do, the feast ends, for them and for you. When a man refuses the script, when he steps outside their reality, the feast trembles, the architects panic, because one man who defines his own frame is more dangerous than an army still asleep. And history proves it. Every revolution began with a single refusal. Every fallen empire was cracked by one question. What if they're lying? But the moment you reject their banquet, the war begins. They will come for you. Not with chains of iron, but with chains of doubt. They will call you insane, a fool, a traitor. They will drown you in noise, flood you with distractions, seduce you with pleasures that feel like freedom but taste like poison, because nothing terrifies the system more than a man who stops playing. And here's the truth no one wants to admit. Most who try fail. They crawl back to the table, broken, whispering apologies to the very masters they cursed. Why? Because reality is heavy, freedom is brutal. When you take the power to define, you take the burden too. No one to blame, no one to save you, no safety net, no script, no excuses. Just raw existence, naked and cold, waiting for you to shape it. But if you endure that storm, if you hold your ground when the world laughs at you, spits on you, drags your name through fire, something happens, something terrifying, something divine. The architects can no longer touch you because their reality stops working on you. You stop being prey, you stop being a guest, you stop being food. That is the breaking of the table, the moment the seat they offered rots to dust beneath you, the moment you walk away and they realize they cannot follow because their power only works on believers, and you stopped believing. They will try to pull you back, with promises, with threats, with blood if they must. But if you hold the line, if you define and do not bend, the feast starves, and the feast starves, the empire falls, not in fire, not in war. It falls in silence when men like you refuse to serve, and now you know how it ends, if you have the strength to make it so. Listen carefully, because this is the last time I speak to you as you are now. After this, there is no going back. You've walked the path through blood and whispers, through hollow halls and broken masks. You've tasted the poison of their banquet and spat it out. That alone marks you. Do you feel it? That weight in your chest, that cold on your skin, that is the price of knowledge. You have seen what few dare to see, that the world is not ruled by swords or coins but by stories, that your chains were carved from words and illusions, that power does not kill, it convinces, and that every smiling face on the screen, every flag waving in the wind, every sermon echoing from marble walls was part of the same theater. Now the curtain is gone, and you stand in the dark with the architects staring back at you. They know your name now. They know you are awake, so here is your choice. You can close this and crawl back into their dream, let the noise lull you to sleep. Pretend you never heard my voice. Most men do. They bow, they forget. They die faceless, feeding the feast until the end. Or you can take the oath to never eat at their table again, the oath to define your own frame, no matter the cost, the oath to live outside the script, hunted, hated, free. If you choose the second path, write these words, twice, in the comments. I break the feast. Do it, and you are no longer a guest, you are no longer prey, you are no longer theirs. But hear me, when you write it, you will feel it. Something will shift, because this is not a game, this is not entertainment, this is war. And when the architects read those words, they will know you, they will watch you, they will test you, and if you fall, they will devour you whole. But if you do not fall, you will be the crack in their empire, the ghost they cannot kill, the blade they cannot see. The hollow feast ends with you, or it never ends at all. The question is, will you take the oath?